right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I hope you are all doing well and adjusting to this new normal of working from home and surviving the social distancing period. Thank you very, very much for joining us all today for our Coping During COVID workshop. This is the last session in a series of 3. And each of these workshops has been focused on various strategies for recognizing signs of stress in ourselves and in our students, but also how to cope during a crisis and some strategies for practicing best practices for self-care. So each one of these sessions has been facilitated by a faculty expert in mental health, and our expert today is Dr. Marvarine Oliver. We've been recording each of these sessions on WebEx so faculty and staff can view at a later time. So right now, I'll have the recorder going for the entirety of Dr. Oliver's presentation, and then I'll stop the recorder right before we move into the portion of the workshop when we're doing a question and answer Q&A session. So, and also if everyone could kindly mute their microphones, please, it'll make it a lot easier for us to hear the presentation. So thank you very much for doing that. So it is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Marvarine Oliver. Dr. Oliver is the Associate Dean of the College of Graduate Studies and a professor in the Department of Counseling and Educational Psychology. She is a licensed professional counselor supervisor, a licensed marriage and family therapist supervisor, and a clinical fellow and approved supervisor in the American Association of Marriage and Family Therapists. Dr. Oliver currently teaches qualitative research and other doctoral courses in the counselor education program. She maintained a private practice for over 30 years and has extensive experience working with anxiety, depression, and trauma. Her research interests have focused on supervision, training, and ethics, and now center on working with student publication efforts. We are very fortunate to have Dr. Oliver here to speak with us today. Thank you for your time, Marvarine. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. As Kelly mentioned, we are talking about coping during COVID-19 with an emphasis on resilience and self-care. My agenda for the day is to talk a little bit about resilience, and then I'm going to focus on remote work and relate that to self-care and balance, and then hopefully bring it all together at the end with how that comes back to our own and to institutional resilience. And I'm also just going to point out that all of this also relates to how we work with students and things that we want to be aware of when we're working with our students. I just haven't and don't plan to talk about it that way because of time. So resilience is kind of an amazing thing. And it's a concept we're going to talk about more in depth in a minute. But first, I think we need to acknowledge that COVID-19 has impacted the country in ways that are different than probably anything most of us have ever experienced. It's not a natural disaster in the sense of how we experience hurricanes and tornadoes, although those are absolutely horrifying events. It's not a terroristic threat or a war or a threat of war in the usual sense of those words. It is more uncertain in some ways for many of us, our faculty, our staff, students, and administrators alike, because we've just watched it morph and grow across the whole world. It's required major adjustments for all of us, and it's required that those adjustments happen quickly. That's something we have to do when we prep for a hurricane. But if anything, we've had periods where we had less clear information coming through nationally about ongoing impacts. The result, like with many tragedies and disasters, has left us with some anxiety, grief, loss. People are in mourning, people are angry. There are a host of emotional reactions, not just in our specific locale, but nationally and globally. Despite the unprecedented part about COVID-19 for us here in the US, and within our campus community. There are things we've done in the past that we all know can help. Some of us have used some of these more than others. But we can certainly use information we have from other disaster events, experiences we've had, experiences our colleagues have had, things that the university has had to adjust to. We can certainly use what we already know about trauma and the aftermath of trauma. We can use what we know about things like surviving and thriving and hardiness and resilience, about the importance of human social connections and how that relates to learning and healing. We can use what we know about online education and remote work in general. We can consider and plan for how we individually and as a community cope with COVID-19 and move through it and forward. Resilience is a term that has long been associated with stress testing of buildings and structures and material, been used in engineering for a long time. At least since 2008, it's been used as a concept for addressing financial risk, including global ones. It's become really common in business and leadership circles. It's not uncommon at all to read about businesses needing to build resilience, universities needing to be resilient. The way most of us are probably most familiar with it is personal resilience, how we can adapt well in the face of whatever current adversities we're struggling with. Resilience, probably the image a lot of us have is one of a rubber band that's been stretched out and then released, and it returns back to pre-stretching size and shape. That is kind of what it is, although as people learn more about personal resilience, we all realize that's not exactly correct. But it's not just about the after, it's about the doing and how we adapt during whatever the traumatic or stressful event is. There are ways we can foster resilience, and the ones on the screen right now are really common. You've probably read them, done them, seen them flash across your social media. We need to prioritize relationships. People can set up calls, do Skype, Zoom meetings with family and friends, but find some way that works for you to keep connections going. You can take care of your body. That's really important. We read it everywhere. We need to take care of physical needs. We need to sleep. We need to eat well. We need to move. We need to engage in spiritual practices. And we also need to avoid harmful adaptations, if you will, such as substance abuse or excessive spending or unhelpful avoidance. We'll talk more about it later, but a little bit of avoidance can be a good thing. It's when it gets excessive that it's not so helpful. We can help other people in ways that make sense for us. We can pay attention to our thinking and the thinking of people around us so that what we're doing is maintaining hope and fostering hope. And we really have to accept change. We have to accept the reality that we're living in a changed circumstance right now. It doesn't mean we like it, but we have to do that in order to be resilient. There are other strategies, and some of these may be of particular help as you think about your work life or your students' academic life. One of those is to just be proactive. If we're going to address adversities and the things that crop up in these horrendous sorts of circumstances that we run into, we need to think a little bit about what we can actually do. Sometimes we get so stuck in what we can't do that we don't think about what we can do. So to the extent possible, we can plan a bit about how we're going to, when we're going to do and how we're going to do what we actually can do. We can each learn from the past. I can think about things that I've done in the past that have worked for me, and I can also think about things that I know tend not to work for me. We can encourage students to do that, our peers to do that. We can move towards those little goals we set when we were being proactive and planning and thinking, even when those are really small. In fact, probably the goals we need to have right now are not the big, huge global goals. These are the how do we move through what we need to move through now goals. We need to keep perspective. We can get help, seek out help when we need it. And again, accept change. I have it listed twice because it's really important. It's probably one of the most important things here is that we are where we are and we have to radically accept that this is where we are and what we're doing. So I'm going to switch gears a bit to remote work. I'm also going to just say an aside, all the faculty already know this. It's really easier to do this when I can see faces. So staring into the screen and talking is odd. I can see Kelly. That's nice. I can see when she smiles or doesn't. So I thought about this a lot in terms of what to cover. Um, Remote work for some of us is fairly easy, for probably more, it's relatively difficult depending on our circumstances, the skills we have for it, the roles we're filling, and frankly, our own temperaments. Some people really do well in front of their computers or in their home office and like that just fine. For many of us, and likely most of our students, remote work is a game changer. It's not why most of us are at a brick and mortar school. We want to see each other. Many of the faculty and staff and students, we're just not set up for it. We don't have dedicated space with all of the things we need. We're in laundry rooms and closets and bedrooms, and I'm in the corner of my den, dining room tables. We often have very little or no privacy, and so it makes our work harder in some ways. We may not have as much bandwidth at our homes that we need. We certainly don't have all the equipment and resources we have access to on campus. It's different to call IT than to walk across the spine and go visit with somebody at the desk or talk to somebody in the library. And we may be having to learn skills or enhance skills that we've really previously not had to use. All of that is stressful. There's a lot of things, by the way, on Inside Higher Ed and in the Chronicle right now. Initially, there was some talk on social media that remote teaching and remote work would provide more time for research and other kinds of productivity. That's pretty much been shot down now. It's not been found to be the case. The need to transition courses to online formats takes time. Doing it well takes even more time. So does assisting the less technologically knowledgeable peers we may have and our students who maybe aren't quite as up to speed on how to do that. And I'm putting myself in the less technologically knowledgeable group rather than the more, although I'm fairly comfortable online. But I also know faculty who've spent a good bit of time coaching their peers. Disruptions may disproportionately impact careers of female academics, academics of color, other underrepresented groups of people. Just when you look forward, especially towards tenure and towards merit and that sort of thing. However, white male academics are also seeing their productivity impacted. Some of that's because some of the whole impact thing is because labs and archives and other needed resources are closed. Field work in many or maybe most cases may just not be possible. Support from colleagues may be missing, including from the ability, including because we can't collaborate in maybe traditional ways. Faculty members, like everybody else in the world, may have responsibility for childcare. They may be homeschooling. They have other increased time demands as a result of life changes resulting from COVID-19. I personally have never washed so many dishes in my life. Well, in 10 years anyway. Primary thoughts of all of us may be about meeting needs of students and families rather than writing up that next grant or finishing an article or that kind of thing. We also need to remember that remote work for staff isn't easy either. Like us, their thoughts may be primarily about meeting the needs of their students they work with and their own families. For staff, and in the dean's office where I work hours are generally 8 to 5. And current circumstance may do well to have some workarounds. While some staff members have people at home who can free up normal business hours, that's not true for everyone. Staff may also have more space difficulties than faculty, just in that they may need to be able to have access to their computers and be available on their computers basically all day long, 8 to 5. Most faculty members don't need to do that. We go online and teach our courses. We do our office hours, but we don't generally have to be available on Jabber 8 to 5, for example. Also, there's been a need for more meetings, and faculty have done that as well. But I know staff have been really covered up with extra meetings rather than just a quick exchange in the hall or with the person across the pod from you. Nicholas Bloom is this person who really likes work at home, and he thinks it's a good option. He writes about that in general, but he has pointed out recently that working at home in COVID-19, and I would argue this applies to hurricanes and other things that we address, simply don't, this current kind of circumstance just doesn't allow for the reality that people have children or other people at home that require care and attention. There's not normally designated space for full-time work, that there's not privacy, and in really good work at home arrangements that are regular ones in business, people have choices. They can do it or not, or they can do it 3 days a week and be in the office 2 days a week. We don't have that option right now. We just have to. And so we adapt however we need to do that. Okay, to the resilience piece of this. Our work days are going to go awry sometimes. Really wrong. And so it helps to remember that adapting to crisis is not this linear upward trajectory at the end of which will be productivity and happiness. It's just not that way. You may find that it gets to be past noon and you still haven't done anything that you intended to do. You may be in a slump for days. Remember, we're all having our own emotional, personal reactions to what's going on with COVID. So one of the first things is to remember not to get stuck in some kind of self-condemnation. It doesn't help. And be flexible in your approach to whatever remains of the day. You know, if the whole day hasn't gone by, thinking about rescuing the small things that you can, even if you don't feel like it. In other words, you want to do a restart. And you can do that with one small thing that maybe improves your work environment, and just do that. For me, I have to watch out for whatever that one small thing is becoming a full-scale reorganization of everything that's on this, I don't know, 8 foot long table. And so now I've spent the rest of the day doing that instead of just doing the one or two things I needed to do. Yeah. So you have to watch out for that. Identify a few things on your to-do list that are important, but quick and relatively easy to do. Things that don't require as much intense focus as some other things, and do those first. This is a great time for taking care of little ticky-tacky things that must be done. Um, Once those are done, if there's time left, then you can move to more complicated tasks that you have the clarity to do. Some days we're just kind of foggy in situations like this. And if we don't have the clarity to do those more brain dependent tasks, intense focus uh, tasks, then it doesn't really help to keep at least in the same way. There may be some other things we can do, such as maybe make an outline for steps we're going to do with that. Remember that the goal isn't perfection, it's to take a small or maybe a few small specific steps to help us get unstuck. The other thing that's smart to do here is even if you get a late start, to end your day at a near normal time rather than working late into the evening to try to make up for lost time. Maybe end it with making a list for a few tasks the next day or neaten your workspace back up. But you still need to end and you need to, you know, take a walk or have dinner or do whatever it is you normally do to wind down in the evening. So let's talk a few minutes about what all these things have to do with um, resilience and self-care. I'm checking my time real quickly. Um, I want to talk a minute about self-care and balance because this is another thing that sometimes causes us more problems in terms of how we think about it, and it does really help. Um, for some of us, when we hear work-life balance, it implies almost a static state that we achieve. We achieve work-life balance and we have it most of the time. There's not a common definition. It depends on who you read. And it can feel like it sets impossible standards for people with multiple roles and responsibilities, and we all have that. And it kind of implies that there's a way to do it right. There are people who work with or study work-life balance who really don't like the concept as it's usually presented, meaning balancing your work time and your family time and your leisure time and your spiritual time and your self-care time, and et cetera, so that there's somewhere near balance amongst all of those things. It helps if we think about balancing instead, and it can help us remember that something we're continually doing. Anytime you're standing, anytime you're sitting in your chair, your body is balancing itself in some ways. There are all kinds of things that go on physiologically. We're making these micro adjustments in our bodies, all the way from our feet and toes throughout our skeletal system all the time. We don't generally notice that we're doing it unless maybe we're standing on one foot and paying attention to. If you balance on one foot, you'll generally be able to feel your foot adjusting, your toes adjusting where the pressure hits. You may not notice all the little tendon movements and all of the things that happen all the way up your body, but we notice it. Or if we're trying to maintain a position that requires us to think about balance, that's what we're doing all the time. There's actually an office of work life at Harvard. Did you know that? There is. The director said that every moment in everyday life is like that. If you remain mostly upright, you're doing it well enough. I really like that way of thinking about it because it just feels less like it's a goal we have to achieve. Most of us are balancing. We're not balanced. We can shift our expectations of ourselves or others and recognize that there's really not a rule book for this. We can understand that most other faculty and staff members are pretty accepting of each other's imperfections as we move to remote work. I haven't had a meeting yet where this may be the first one just because I can't see everybody. People haven't had dogs and kids and spouses moving through the house or barking or something. And most of us seem to enjoy that. It humanizes us. There was some material on social media when all of this really got started, really urging people to show up for those meetings, just like you would at work and all that kind of stuff. That got shut down pretty quickly too, and sometimes pretty harshly. But we're all improvising as we're adjusting to the current context, and sometimes our contexts are shifting moment by moment. Yeah, the journey, not the destination. I just saw Ivy's comment. We just have to count on the fact that something's going to interrupt a meeting or a class. We need to, and here's that acceptance word again. We need to accept that it's likely harder right now for us and for our coworkers and for our students to balance everything. We have so many pulls, and we're responding to those pulls without all of our normal habituated ways of being able to respond. We're responding to new circumstances and information that we haven't had to in the past. Most of us have not had to figure out how to do remote work or remote teaching and learning on top of the kind of anxiety and grief and stress that we have with COVID-19. Be your own scientist. Really pay attention to what works for you, when you need to take a break, what happens when A happens, what happens when B happens, and find ways to connect. Think about what you need to say no to or what you need to delay. And start with tools that are on your typical go-to list for managing stress and demands. Then go beyond your favorite tools because no tools work all the time in all circumstances. Mentioned earlier in another context, we can ask trusted others what they're doing. And I'm talking specifically about remote work right now. Expand the strategies we have. We can make schedules that we can live with, knowing that those schedules are going to be disrupted. They're not going to work right. But many of us need some kind of plan. It's important to set up times that you're not available to work. One of the things that happens when people work from home is they think they have to be available 24/7, or at least until 10 at night, and then by 8 the next morning. We don't, and we need to not do that. We can also create a way to shift from work time to home time. We don't have our drive home anymore. Even that little bit of a ritual, most of us don't have. So figure out what your shift is. How do you shift that? And recognize that the way you personally recharge matters. You may be a person who really needs to recharge with time that's essentially alone. You may be somebody who needs to recharge spending time with others. And know that however you did it before may be different now because we just don't have some of the options we had a month ago. But nonetheless, find ways to recharge. I've already said this, do all the things we've been told to do repeatedly: eat, sleep, exercise, wash our hands. Another really important thing I want to mention just before I finish, is that we need to use reputable sources of information to keep up. We also need to be judicious about how much of that we watch or at what time we watch it. I have a friend who calls me every night to check on me, and he wants to talk about politics and COVID. Talking about that at 10 o'clock at night is not a good thing for me. So we've really had to, and I'm his primary source for being able to talk about that stuff. So we've had to find some workarounds for how we can do that. So he has his need to share, and I have my need to not be anxious at 10 at night. So we both have those needs met. We can look at university resources available to us and to students. And finally, make use of the EAP or other telehealth options if the slump lasts too long or you find yourself being bothered beyond what is reasonable for you. And by bothered, I mean not bothered, highly, highly anxious, or really in a lot of grief and not being able to deal with it the way you think is in a way that's important to you. I'm going to thank you, by the way. I'm going to turn this back to Kelly and quit sharing my screen so that we have some time to talk.
Margaret, thank you very much for taking the time and the effort in putting this presentation together and sharing your insight and wisdom with all of us. I personally really love the idea of the shift change ritual. Personally, I have found it somewhat comforting to, okay, get ready for work, get ready to go to my workstation, put on a collared shirt before I get in front of the computer, et cetera, but have not considered the importance of the other side of the shift of, decompressing and being done. Do you have any recommendations or practices that you do in order to transition to the next part of the day?
Sure. And then I want to hear from others too. One thing is I walk my dog at the end of the workday, even if I don't want to, because he likes it and I need to move. And once I've walked him, you can bet I'm not coming back to the computer. I eat dinner. I eat something for dinner. I might. Oh,
Derek, that's
I
great,
saw
Derek.
that. Honey, I'm home. I love that. You see somebody's comment? I'm gonna open my chat so I can see them. Yes, but so whatever I do for dinner, I walk the dog. I certainly get out of my email and I turn off the university computer. My personal computer stays on most of the time, but I turn off the personal computer. What do the rest of you do?
Hi, this is Carmen here. Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Oliver. First, what I love to start the day, or how I love to start the day, is simply walk straight down to Ocean Drive and get where I can see the water early in the morning before there are crowds and traffic, and I enjoy that. And then in the evening, like you said, go for another short walk, and boy, get away from this computer and turn off the news. Because I can feel my anxiety rise sometimes when I start hearing the statistics and the spread and transmission, and I think I just do not need that to close out my day, and then that's it. That's enough of that.
That's a great recommendation. And I thank Dr. Oliver for her presentation, but I'd also really like to thank all of you for being here today, because I know that one of the things that make this situation so abnormal is the fact that we don't get to see each other on a regular basis, and we're really missing that emotional and social support that we're so used to. So thank you all for being here to sustain this robust faculty community that we have at TAMUCC. Thank you all.
Ruby had her hand up. Thank you. Okay. Does it make sense to you why we also need to think specifically about remote work and how we manage work as a part of our resilience now? I've probably heard.
Hi, Marguerite, it's Ivy. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just unmuted. I don't know if other folks can hear me. First to you and to Kelly, I think this is just a brilliant piece of information and help, and just such a wonderful workshop to do. So I commend my friend and my person, Kelly Smith, and all of y'all for tapping the expertise of some incredible people on campus. And as soon as I saw the name Marvarine Oliver pop up, I'm like, oh, I am so there. So I want to thank you for just the depth of information, for your expertise, and just grounding this information today in, I wrote a little chat thing that said, I've never done so many dishes either. I'm like, where is all this coming from? The food prep and it's just, there's these little things that just kind of come at you. And I live by myself. And so that's a blessing and a curse.
Yes,
I'm very used to it. I'm very used to being by myself and structuring my time. Even when I'm teaching face to face, I have, a lot of that. But anyway, it's just, things like people saying, like even Carmen saying, I walk down to Ocean Drive, I see the water, I walk the dog, or I limit the information. And I've really noticed that I used to consume a ton of cable news and political news. And now I feel the energy rising in me and the anxiety. And I'm like, turn that crap off, just go do something else. But I just thank you for it's a researched and a scholar's approach to your information today, but also a real grounded in life experiences. I've always enjoyed that about you, but a real grounded kind of approach to the information to say, this is what we're experiencing. And, the research and the scholarship meets where we're living. So I'll close with that, but with a big thank you for the practical application of this information. Very helpful.
One of the things thank you, Diane.
Yeah.
One of the things I was aware of as I was thinking about this is that we really do need, I'll claim that for me, I need to really feel this press to really support the resilience of my academic unit, college grad studies, and the university as well, because our students need all of us. I need all of us. I need the university to go on. I feel so blessed compared to some people in the economy right now that I'm working. I'm getting paid to do a job that I really enjoy, and I can do it without being exposed to, I don't know, who all might be an asymptomatic carrier or whatever. And whatever I can do to support the resilience of the university as well has personal meaning for me. And so when I can be resilient with my work and with my remote work and figure out workarounds or whatever, then I figure I'm supporting my department, I'm supporting grad studies, I'm supporting, and so that bigger meaning thing becomes important to me. Maybe that's what I'm getting around to, finding meaning. And why bother to do this? Well, those are some of my whys.
Does anyone else have any best practices or experiences that they would like to share with the group for what has worked or perhaps what has not worked with working remotely?
Well, this is Ruby. I'll share that working remotely is not really working for engineering that well because I'm teaching senior capstone design classes, and there the students are required to build a working prototype that solves an engineering problem, and they have not been able to, go to the labs and use the equipment in the workshop. Some of them have taken some of the stuff at home to home, and it's just they're just not getting the skills that they need. And then we're now talking about not having any lab access for some of the summer courses, which they need to get into the courses in the fall, which are prerequisites. And so it's just not working that great for engineering because the students are not getting the skills that they need to move to the next course. In the case of graduating seniors, we moved from having them show a working prototype to simulations, but that's a software skill. It's not a hands-on skill, which, some of the people in the world, they are defined as essential people because they get to do these hands-on type of work. And so I'm just concerned that, we're just not able to meet the student learning outcomes for all of our engineering courses, especially the ones that require hands-on. So, the lecture part, I'm doing fine, but I think I really appreciate this presentation because I'm one of those things who sit at the computer at 9 in the morning and get up at 10, and my husband tells me, you haven't gotten up today from your chair. Here's some food, it's like I'm in the prison, in an open prison. My husband's upstairs doing his class. My son is sitting across from me with his headphones on. We're on the dining table. So I'm like, oh, she sees me because she's talking about me. So yeah, so I'm struggling with this transition actually because I have students who don't have computers and they're graduating seniors. I have students who don't have internet access and they're calling the Corpus Christi Hall for that 2-hour appointment daily to be able to use those computers. So, and that anxiety of not being able to help and being in this, to the students, you're in a power position and then not being able to help them. It's really hard for the students too, that they get frustrated when you can't offer help to them. So it's just been challenging, especially for me. So I appreciate this presentation.
Yeah, and I'm aware that there are some programs, some departments that have had more struggle. And yeah, your people have to do hands-on stuff that can't just be simulated. We're not an online university. That's not our primary mission. And so sorting all of that out has been difficult, I think. We don't have a good way to do it. And we're adding that on top of the stress that we experience and the emotional reactions and maybe knowledge of people who are sick or perhaps have died or families who are impacted by the disease, the pandemic. So,
Hey, Marvarine,
yeah.
it's Ivy. I just wanted to say one thing to Ruby, and I hope she can hear me because I heard her, and my heart really goes out to her. I just, one of the things that was really tough for me, and I'm not past it, is I battle the gap between what I want to do and what I can reasonably deliver. And I think all of us, I've never taught online, and I teach a Monday night class called Communication and Sexuality. And I've worked really hard to create, before spring break, a safe space for people to talk about things they're uncomfortable talking about, or to talk about topics that you don't normally talk about in mixed company or beyond your own home. And so there's a gap for me between what I hoped to deliver and what I have delivered in my courses in other points in time and what I can do now. And the frustration of that is anxiety producing for me until I recognized it and labeled it. It still makes me cray cray. it still bugs me. But, we're college professors. We have standards. We know the things that our students need. We are in place to give it to them. And the gap between all that wanting and what we can actually pull off, I just have to not beat myself up about that and just try to let it go. Acknowledge it when I feel it welling up in me, like, I can't, I want to do something different. And then just saying, okay, got to give that up, and it's not my fault, and I'm going to give them the best I can get them, and I'm going to, give them through, and I got to be okay with that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure, Ruby. I feel your pain, girlfriend.
What about others? Oh,
I have a question.
yeah, it is more difficult if there's a really dysfunctional family situation at home, or at least can be, and I think is most of the time. Um, Even families that get along pretty well together are struggling because they have so much enforced together right now, and they can't get away from each other, and they're having to interact in ways they didn't. And when you add, um, which means continuously, not just for the summer, but when you add on top of that, um, relational stressors, whether that's spousal, partner, or parent child, or grandparents and parents, it makes the whole situation harder. And I would love to say that I have some good solutions for that, but there aren't any that are universal. You can there there are ways that families do that that have a lot of negotiation in the sorting out. Like Ruby, I'm not saying you and your husband have difficulties, but I'm saying you're upstairs, downstairs, so you engineer some space for yourselves. It may, if people are willing in a difficult family situation, to engineer space apart, at least for parts of the day when people need to be working, that can be helpful. One of the issues with dysfunctional families is sometimes there are members who are not willing to negotiate that space, and it can make it really, really difficult. I don't mean to just throw this out there willy-nilly, but and Dr. Sharp may have a comment about this, but you really might want to consider, if you can find a place to do it from that's private enough, uh, using the EAP and whatever telehealth services are available to help you problem solve some of that in the short term. Dr. Sharp, anything else come to you about that? Any other?
Yeah, I would um, encourage that too. And especially, right now there are so many telehealth resources available. I have a lot of students now that when we're doing the counseling session, they're taking the phone out to the car because that's literally the only place where they have privacy. But they've made that a priority because they need it to survive in the environments where they're having to live right now.
Yeah, thank you for that. I haven't seen real numbers, but it would certainly be typical, and there are certainly anecdotal accounts of domestic violence going up, incidents of child abuse going up, um, and those are on the more extreme end. I mean, just constant fighting and bickering adds to the stress, or other kinds of dysfunctions that occur in families. So yeah, I would really encourage reaching out to maybe do some telehealth options for problem solving. If it's getting in the way of of a person surviving the way they need to be able to during this time.
This is Sandy Stokes from the College of Nursing, and I appreciate what you just talked about, and I want to bring it around to, we have several students that are first generation college students, and we've noticed that because they're at home and they're at home now, so they're not going to school, so have obligations with the family, even whenever they haven't learned to set boundaries with family members, don't have those skills. And so I appreciate the fact that for us as faculty to remember, we can refer them to the counseling center still, if they'll go ahead and, reach out to that, so that they can get those tools that they may need. However, there's some students that we dealt with them face to face, and as first generation, and sometimes culturally, they just are not willing to take that step or that help. And so I've found it very frustrating remotely, even, to be able to help with that.
Yeah. I agree.
And I do thank y'all very, very much for having this presentation. It was, I really appreciated the realness of it.
Thanks. Anything else?
This is Ivy again. I just wanted to say that was Sandra from nursing.
Mhm.
Yeah, I thought that was she just put something on radar for me that I hadn't thought of, and is probably why some of my students are not responding to anything that I do. That whole thought of they're at home, and so now they're doing family stuff, and there's a disconnect with their student identity. That's kind of amazing as an insight, and thank you for that, because that wouldn't have occurred to me. So that's something I'm going to really do some thinking about. Thank you, y'all. It's so good to see and hear colleagues too.
Yes.
There's community there.
No, along those same lines, I'm curious about how I know that some of us have children, young children here at home with us as we are trying to work remotely. Rachel, Rita, I'm talking to you specifically. I'm wondering if there's going to be any sort of effect on our children long term after this, because I know that I have maternal guilt almost every single morning when my daughter wants to snuggle, she's home and she's not at school, she's here at home. And so when we're talking about that separation of identity, she's here with me, but mommy's got to jump on a WebEx at 9 o'clock, so I can't snuggle with you right now. So I know that there's some confusion there, and we're all working through these boundaries. But for those of you folks in counseling, has there been any research or literature so far that speaks to that boundary setting and that identity with smaller children in the home during this time?
And I'm going to invite Teresa Dr. Sharp to jump in. It's going to be years before we have meaningful data from now. And I think research about difficult circumstances in childhood, even early childhood, will both give you responses that have to do with long-term damage, but also of amazing resilience, and also I can't really tell that it made a difference one way or another. So when I see things in social media, for example, saying, okay, this is gonna be with children forever. Well, maybe, and maybe not. It's hard to say how people are gonna remember this forever. I think it depends on where we are in the world and how our local environment is doing and how adults in the environment are responding. And one of my best memories of childhood is a major hurricane. We had fun. I mean, as a family, I can still see it and feel it and still get a little tingly when hurricanes are coming because it was so much fun. And have to remember that I'm a grown up now. So I don't know that there is real good predictive information anywhere. Dr. Sharp, do you have different information or additional?
Well, and honestly, I haven't looked at the literature or research related to that, but I know we've had conversations about this with our staff because several of them are parents and are trying to do the homeschooling at the same time as working. And one of the things, Dr. Oliver, that you spoke about today is that it really is not business as usual, and we can't pretend that it is. And so one of the things that I have really kind of encouraged my staff to do is just, figure out, what sort of schedule is going to work for you. And it may not be an 8-hour workday from 8 to 5. And when your children are our priority. And so taking time, I mean, sometimes, the children end up, coming into our virtual staff meetings, but honestly, I think, seeing the children, seeing the pets, I mean, this is honestly helpful to all of us too. And every day is not the same either, and recognizing that, acknowledging that. And so it's sort of a work in progress but especially I have such enormous admiration for all of you who are parents and are trying to take care of your children and facilitate this homeschooling in addition to working. I mean, you really are heroes right now.
Thank you. Thank you all for that. So it looks like we have about a minute left. Does anyone have anything additional that they would like to add or any comments that they would like to make? Well, Dr. Oliver, thank you again for your presentation this afternoon. It was very, very helpful, very informative, and also very comforting. And it was wonderful to see all of you. And thank you all again for attending this and other sessions and building this community and helping us sustain the social support that we all need so much right now. So that being said, if any of you have any suggestions thank you, Rachel. We want another faculty staff party. Believe me, we're trying to figure out a way to do it. If any of you have any suggestions for topics or content workshops that you would like to see the CFE put on, please send an email to me. Make any suggestions that you have. Our programming is based on what you need. We don't just arbitrarily decide the workshops that we're going to put on. So just feel free to send us suggestions and we will certainly do this as often as possible. So thank you all again. Thank you, Dr. Oliver.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me.
Have a wonderful day, everyone.